Hello and welcome to The Flickering Torch, and on today's episode we're looking at an RPG based on the paintings of a post-apocalyptic medieval painter. Just as a preface to this, I did receive a review copy for this game, however it wasn't for a positive review. I could essentially just play the game and make a review. So today we're looking at Hieronymous, which is an RPG that was forged in the dark, which means it was based off Blades in the Dark. This RPG is designed by Laurie O'Connell, I believe I'm saying that correctly, and it's a very interesting twist on the genre. So just really quickly, Ben in the chair, please tell us, what's a Hieronymous? Hieronymous Bosch was a Dutch painter in the medieval era, most known for his portrayals of worlds and creatures beyond human comprehension. Major themes in his work include sin and the concept of Judgment Day. Excellent, and I know what you're thinking, how do you make an RPG based off a medieval painting? Well, they've done it, dagnabbit, they have done it, and it's a really interesting game. So, reading Hieronymous is much different to reading another RPG book. It takes a very non-traditional look at the genre. When I'm reading it, I'm thinking less like I'm reading Index Card RPG or D&D or Blades in the Dark, and more like I'm kind of reading an exercise for like a really cool history or art class. So what gives us this feeling is the way that Hieronymous deals with player characters. Now, you're not supposed to be playing a person in that world, from at least my reading of it. You're supposed to play an archetype, like you're a court alchemist, you're every court alchemist, you're the archetypical court alchemist. You're not playing just an artisan, you're playing the archetypical guildmaster artisan. And taking this kind of untraditional approach is really interesting. Even the main big bad evil guy for the campaign is less of a person or an entity and more of kind of a metaphor for all of the ills of medieval society. In fact, even in the description, it doesn't really have a description of what this astral terror is. It just kind of gives you a bunch of things you need to think about when you're trying to embody it. And these things are wide and varying, from collapse, famine, to iconoclasm, excess, fire, and even development. It's such an odd twist on the genre, and I think that's what really is elevating this game. What's the actual setup here? Well, you're playing refugees fleeing this astral terror known as the Follower. And to flee these things, you have to jump through the various paintings of the artist Hieronymous Bosch. That's where the game gets its name from. That's kind of the hex crawl you're going on. So I understand, just thinking about it, how do I even play this game? Well, let me just talk you through the session we ran, and I can let you know kind of moment to moment what you'll be doing, because when I first read the book I was like a little bit confused as to how to actually implement it. It was a really cool bunch of ideas, but how to actually implement it. I think once you hear how I've run it, you might have a little bit easier understanding of how you create an adventure out of this. So the worldscape me and my players started on was the Last Judgment Bruges. And we started off in this area where we saw a bunch of noblemen struggling to pull this boat out of the water while a priest on the boat was shooing them off, and this boat for some reason was shaped like a giant shoe. And my players went in and they tried to get passage on this boat, but to prove it, they had to prove that they were sort of without sin. And the kind of interesting dynamic there is all the noblemen were the people who were supporting the priest, and they all thought they bought their way to salvation. In fact, the priest was abandoning them because he realised they weren't following his teachings or his code of morality. You can kind of do this thing where you're taking the themes and making those the kind of encounters. And to kind of add a timer to this, because it's always quite nice to have a timer on an encounter, if we look over to this segment of the painting, we see this weird demon-esque thing with these blue butterfly wings. So I said that that was slowly approaching from the lake to the boat. The players get on the boat and they ask the nobleman, well, why can't you ferry us? And the noblemen say, well, the priest is the only person who can sail the boat. That's what he told us. He's the only person who knows. For me, that was kind of like priests saying that they're the only people who can give you a path to salvation. That was kind of the idea of it. So eventually the players have enough of the priest calling them sinners, kill the priest and try and take the boat. And they're being constantly pursued by this blue-winged demon. So eventually they get to the shores of C5 over here. And in here, the book says, here, within a copper cylinder, there's some form of conference taking place. And it asks the question, what are they discussing? And so, because of one of the key tenets of the book that you're supposed to tell the story together, I took this question and gave it to the players. What are they discussing? And one of my players came up with a really interesting answer. You see this ladder here, they're discussing which way is the right way up. Kind of added this weird sort of dreamlike Alice in Wonderland element to that kind of encounter, and eventually one of the players climbs up the ladder and realises the ladder does have one way around because he can't climb down anymore. And this blue-winged demon is still approaching. Eventually they end up jumping off that roof, conversing with this vole-riding character here, continuing on with their journey, passing this gruesome mill that's slowly changing people, and eventually they try and escape the worldscape. Unfortunately, the game ended because of this follow-a-clock system. They went through the worldscape, had to roll a dice, and it came up with, I think, a 5, and the follow-a-clock at that point was filled, so the game was over. So, me and my players had an absolute blast playing this. It was interesting to kind of explore more themes, rather than just like a fantasy world. You were kind of exploring themes of the medieval era, the decay, all the kind of things that were wrong with it. And that was super, super interesting. We really liked how much of a quick implementation of Blades in the Dark this was. The stats were very simple. I think there was only 4 of them. They were really quick to build characters. We could kind of jump in very quickly and everything could be easily resolved with a dice roll because the descriptions of what all the things are quite broad, and so it was easy to find out which stat we kind of needed to use for a specific check. Another thing is, although I was initially skeptical about using one of these paintings as a hex crawl and not a point crawl, I think it worked really, really well. Players instantly knew that they could go to any space from any adjacent space. They could kind of quickly figure out what kind of trial they would be under going to those next spaces. And so yeah, it really does work as a hex crawling through one of these paintings. We also thought that regaining stress was very thematic, so to regain stress points back, you have to commit a sin, and this increases a tick on the follower clock. So it was kind of like your sins will be your own undoing in the end, and we thought that was super thematic and super fun. However, there are some things in this game that didn't quite work for us. I think chief among them was we thought that follower clock was too small. I wanted to go into other worldscapes, and we obviously only got through the first worldscape from my description earlier. Our main problem was that dice roll going between worldscapes just entirely ended the game. Even though they had this really tense moment where they escaped, we had to end the game because the judgment clock filled up. So after kind of discussing with the players a little bit, we came up with some things that we would maybe house rule if we played it again. The main one being that follower clock is either A, bigger, or B, when you jump between a worldscape, instead of rolling a d6 for follower ticks, we should roll a d6 and add that amount of stress to each player. That would encourage them more to kind of commit those mortal sins and tick the follower clock on themselves. Another thing that was floated was maybe if the group commits a sin, it only ticks one thing on the follower clock. I didn't really like that suggestion, but that's one of the things the players sort of suggested as an idea so we could keep playing. And that judgment clock is a cool mechanic. I really like these mechanics where RPGs have definite endings. We just wanted to keep playing because we were having such a blast, and as we were trying to kind of play to all the rules in the book, we ended the session there. Another thing that might have improved our experience is Blades in the Dark, which is what this game is based on. Their character sheets kind of almost interweave the rules with the character sheets. We would like to see this kind of implemented in other Blades in the Dark system, and it would really help with this one because that stress mechanic. It would be nice to just have that gives you a -1 dice modifier. Just simple things like that to help us run the game quicker, especially if you're playing with a group of players that you're new with or haven't played Forge in the Dark. Would really help. The last thing, this isn't a gripe for me, this is just something I think GMs should be aware of. The world and the lore is more expressed through themes here, and it requires the GM to do kind of a lot of legwork. The first 3 of the paintings have sort of questions or little snippets of what you find in some of the spaces, and I thought these were really, really helpful, but especially the ones that asked questions. However, the last 3 or 4 paintings don't have these, and I think it would be really nice if they did actually include these kind of questions. But for what you get, it's really, really interesting. However, I think new GMs might struggle to create a session out of just the sort of themes. I know I had to have like a separate Wikipedia page open while I was reading the book and planning. So it's something that I think is a really good exercise for experienced GMs, but new GMs and new players might kind of struggle with that. Overall, I would heartily recommend Hieronymous. We had a blast playing it. We wanted to play it for longer than the game unfortunately allowed us to, and I think we would definitely jump in if we could tweak those little rules. Being one of the first new RPGs I've played this year, I was really thrilled to dive in, especially after reading the description. I'm going to leave a link in the description so you can pick it up. It's really reasonably priced, and I think you'll get at least 1 or 2 really interesting sessions. And I think it's really quite nice as a GM exercise to kind of jog your brain on using more themes in your games rather than just locations and lore from books. If you have played Hieronymous, please leave me a comment and say how you found it. I personally really enjoyed my time with it. Remember to follow me on Twitter at @TheFlickeringTorch. Catch up on our Blades in the Dark live streams in the playlist on my channel, or come watch us live at 7:30 British Standard Time. And happy gaming, and I'll see you next time.